Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. I am Jesse Firestone, your host. Today is the July 2026 Ask Me Anything episode. Before we jump into the questions, just a reminder that these episodes are supported by my Patreon and by my clients. If you want lots of bonus content, or you want to ask questions in these AMAs, or if you just want to support me and support the show, you can be a patron over at patreon.com/innerfireclimbing. Also, consider giving me a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The podcast is still a pretty small part of what I do, but the reviews, I'm told, help other people find the show, and it also lets me know that you're out there listening. I've had some people talk to me about my audio quality. I don't really have a podcast studio here, so sometimes you will hear garbage trucks, electric cars, etc., babies screaming, things like that. That's not super likely to change in the future, but big thanks to my editors. They tend to get most of that stuff out of there, so thanks to them. But I will continue to keep doing my best to tune the show up insofar as it is supported by Patreon. So thanks to those who have offered feedback. And if you have any other questions or feedback, you can always DM me at Coach Jfire on Instagram or email me coachjfire@gmail.com. All right, let's go. Olga's question for the month. Describe your perfect climbing partner for bouldering and ropes if there's a difference. Matching or overlapping in levels, styles, body type, etc. Someone you want to be with when you are climbing on a limit proj. Some background. I think I'm struggling with this a lot and end up climbing by myself whenever it's a limit project. Most of my projects were sent solo. I feel bad about wasting other people's time when they are not interested in the project anymore or at all. Maybe two questions here. Yeah, it is kind of two questions because I'm not sure that the perfect partner will solve the problem of feeling that anxiety or pressure of not wanting to climb on your project with another person who's maybe done climbing on it or not interested in it. That's kind of a you problem, whereas a perfect partner is kind of a different thing, like a tactical thing that you can work on by meeting other people. It is very nice when partners are near your ability level, but I don't think that that's a requirement. And actually, I've climbed with Olga. For the general listener, Olga and I have climbed together. We are not at the same level. Olga has carried pads to my project many times, so you actually are evidence that people don't need to be at the same level. And you're a great climbing partner. So most of my best partners, I would say, were just good people who I enjoy being around, and we're within like a reasonable distance of the climbing grade. That's like the best if you do actually want to climb with somebody. I think you need to be within maybe 2 grades. But if it's a good person and it's someone you enjoy being around, and as long as the support is reciprocated, then it shouldn't really matter if the level is similar. Now, I've had the most fun climbing with people when I'm actually climbing with them, when it's like, you don't want them to be flashing all your projects, but I've definitely had friends who we would hike to something and they would flash it and they were happy to hang out for a couple hours. And maybe they would even hike back to it again. As long as they're at a level where we could hike to a different style of thing, and maybe I would do it quickly or flash it and they would struggle with it. And then you get this like reciprocation. But if it's always them flashing your project, I think it does start to get a little bit tiresome for both of you. Like the social relationship would have to be a lot better if that was the climbing relationship, if that makes sense. Body type, I don't think has any impact other than the bigger someone is, the more stuff they can carry. And I've definitely used that to my advantage when I have sort of full-size adult male climbing buddies who can carry, more pads. It's beneficial. As far as like the social side of just being buddies with people, I can kind of tell, I think, if they're going to be good climbing buddies for me, if I drive with them to the crag or if it's a long hike. I'm really interested in like what the conversation is like. So kind of hopefully nobody who's listening and has gone climbing with me is like judging themselves if this was them. But kind of the most boring thing to me is when you're driving or hiking and you're just talking about climbing the whole time. Like, oh, how was this project? And like, what were you trying last week? And how did that thing go? And what did you think when you did this? And is that thing V9 or V10? And that stuff's cool. And I love talking about climbing. Obviously, I have a podcast about it. But can the person talk about anything other than climbing? I think that's important for me. I think it's become increasingly important as I've gotten older. And like, I've just had those conversations about, oh, hey, what's your project? Is that thing V9 or V10? I've just talked about that so many times. And it's nice to kind of change it up. So when there's no other topics available and the only thing you can connect with that person is climbing, I think it gets a little bit, I don't know, uninspiring maybe. With rope climbing partners, I think patience is probably the key variable, both to give to your partner and also hopefully to look for in a partner, because with sport climbing, there's just very, very long periods of time where you need that person to be attentive, but not necessarily needing your attention. So they need to be giving you a really good belay, and be really focused on you and not like losing attention. And they need to be patient while doing that. And then you need to be able to give them that. And so they need to be able to focus when it's their turn also. With bouldering, I think it's like if somebody's a little more ADHD, which might be me sometimes, it's like a little bit more okay if they're kind of flighty and like not as focused and stuff, especially when it's your turn. Like if they lose a little bit of focus, lose a little bit of interest, it's easy to just be like, hey man, I'm getting ready to try. Can you spot me or whatever? Whereas with sport climbing, it's like they need to be very switched on all the time. So it's a little more important, I guess. But yeah, I mean, bouldering, you can do by yourself. So that's like a huge benefit. And it seems like you've developed a lot of comfort with that and a lot of confidence with that. And that's actually a huge rarity. You know, like most people do not send most of their limit projects solo. So I think you're maybe perceiving that as a bad thing, and maybe it is something to kind of try to expand, but it is also a skill that you've honed that a lot of people don't have at all. So it's kind of I see it as kind of a benefit or kind of a good thing as well. Yeah. And maybe the last thing is just like, if you really want to be good friends with someone, like, in life, it's not even a climbing thing. Like you have to assume a little bit that people are self-actualized. I think that's what relieves social anxiety, is just assuming that if someone's not having fun or they don't want to do something, that they're going to say it. And those are the best people to be around. The people who are like honest about what they want and how they feel. Those tend to be good relationships. You know, they're formed on good communication, and that self-actualization is really, really important with climbing partners. So if somebody's your buddy and you go climbing with them and, you know, you're worried about whether they want to be there or not, like if they seem like a self-actualized person, that's going to inspire a lot more comfort. And if you don't get that vibe from them, then that would make sense why you feel anxious about them not wanting to be there, because maybe they're not being honest about whether they want to be there or not. That's a hard thing to read, but I do think it's really important. So I find the older people get, the more self-actualized they are. That's a generalization, but, and I've climbed with a lot of younger people who are very patient, self-actualized. So yeah, maybe it is just a huge generalization, or maybe as you climb harder, you get more focused. I'm not sure. Could be some of both. Anyways, I wish you the best of luck. Hopefully we can climb together. I'm happy to come carry paths, do your thing, because you've done that for me. So thank you. Okay, next question. Case asks, what are all your Squamish microclimate tactical secrets? Damn. It has asked me anything, so I guess I have to answer this. When I asked Ethan Salvo about Squamish microclimate tactical secrets, he said he just goes anyways, no matter what. I think here's some things that I pay attention to. Obviously, temperature and humidity are really important. In Squamish specifically, I find the humidity forecast really unreliable because it's so dependent on the shade, the timing of the shade, the wind, and the overnight lows. So as an example, if the weather forecast says that the humidity is going to be low and the temperature is going to be like decent at 10 a.m. or noon, that might seem like good conditions. But if it was warm overnight, so if the temperature hasn't really come up very much between, say, 3 a.m. and 10 a.m., it's going to feel incredibly manky because it never like cooled off and shed all that heat out of the forest. And it's just going to feel like a jungle in there. That's kind of what I've learned. So I pay a lot of attention to the overnight lows. I think they're really important in Squamish. As with any other place, it's just in a lot of places with less tree cover and like alpine places, it's just not as much of an issue. Wind is super important because that dramatically impacts how the actual conditions feel on the rock. That's always true, extra true in Squamish with the humidity. Squamish is basically a beach place, it's like a coastal place. And so wind is super key for things feeling reasonably good, but also you get a lot of moisture and humidity coming in from the sound. I kind of mentioned shade timing. I think that's super crucial. You want to know like what direction your boulder faces and how much of the day it's in the shade. If it's got a lot of tree cover and it's in the shade all day, it's going to be humid for a lot of the summer. If it gets sun at a certain part of the day, when it's in the sun, the humidity might be way lower. And so there might be an opportunity to snipe good conditions before or after that, like when the sun's not directly on it, but the sun is on the surrounding area. And so the local humidity will be lower, which I guess illustrates the importance of going to the boulder a lot of times to learn the details. And you want to go to the boulder when you're not committed to climbing on it. So you want to just like kind of know what the weather's like, know the angle of the sun, and hike to the boulder and just see how it's doing. Is it in the sun? Is it in the shade? Does it feel manky? Is the wind getting to it? Is the wind blocked by the trees? What direction is the wind coming from? If it is getting wind, learn all those things, and you want to learn them in a low consequence day. So ideally, your first couple of days of a trip, you're going to want to hike to all your projects and kind of check them out. And anytime you're near your project on a different climbing day, you probably want to go look at your project and just kind of scope the microclimate, scope the immediate conditions and see what they're like. So I'll give you an example. I climbed in the Ashlew a lot when I was there this summer, and I did a few boulders there, but one of them I did is like on the edge of the forest, and it kind of faces, it has a little clearing, and it faces kind of into the, I want to say into the sky. It's on like a hillside, and it just faces kind of out of the trees towards the road, a lot more exposed, and the sun is there in the morning. And the boulder's never in the direct sun, but you just get this heat pocket that comes in through that gap in the trees. And so the boulder feels really, really warm, even though it's in the shade. Further into the forest, I climbed some other problems that are, more in the forest, and in there, it's going to feel way more humid. The wind didn't penetrate as much. It's still classic Squamish. Like the canopy is cooler than it is out there, where Red Queen, that first boulder, is. But the really interesting thing was like one of the later problems I did in Ashlew, Copper Reflux. It's really in a proud position kind of on this hill. If you ever go to Ashlew, like most people will go there and climb this V5 called Dreamfire. Copper Reflux is right next to it. And for whatever reason, like, my buddy Dylan actually pointed this out. Copper just is kind of good conditions. Like, I think that whole little amphitheater that it sits in, the wind all just pushes towards Copper, and the trees are set up such that the humidity doesn't really nest around that boulder. It's got a good amount of space around it. And so that boulder just stays pretty good. Whereas Red Queen, the other one, even though it's in basically the same area, it's a stone's throw away, just felt way warmer and way more like summery conditions over there, even on the same day, basically. So it pays to, if you go to try one thing, it pays to walk 100 feet over to the other thing and just see how it's doing. And then maybe at the end of your session, walk over there again and see if it's changed, and try to like learn all those little things as best you can. Oh, minor tactic related to that. Learn a lot of different places to warm up, like find good warm-ups in all the different zones. The Grand Wall has good places to warm up. The North Walls have good places to warm up. Ashlew has, very limited warm-ups as an example. So like you're going to want to know what that is for your project or projects so that you can kind of get a sense of the conditions by warming up as close to your project as possible so that you get a closer microclimate. A word on weather forecasts really quick, because that's on my notes too. I actually learned this not too long ago. Weather forecasts are based on a grid of the map, and the elevation is averaged out for that grid. So I think in Canada, most of the models are like 20 kilometer square. So like 20 by 20. And in Squamish, because it has all these mountains to the east of it, and actually on the west, on the other side of the sound, is all mountains too. So I don't know where the grid is exactly, but the average elevation is very high, whereas Squamish itself is like extremely low elevation. So a lot of weather forecasts are going to aggregate that elevation as being high, and it's going to look like it has more precipitation. It's going to look a little more windy. So what you want is a model that aggregates a lot of other different models that have different grids and overlap each other, and something that has a point forecast that takes elevation into account. So the one that I was using this last trip is called alpineconditions.com. It has a lot of like useful settings on there, but you can go there, pick a point, obviously like right in front of the chief is a good point, and then just reduce it down to like wind, temperature, precipitation, and humidity would be like the four key things. And then you can change the number of forecast days, and you can see like the aggregated for for that, like, 4 days or 10 days or whatever. Very, very, very useful. I would say in the month that I was in Squamish, it was not wrong about the amount of precipitation a single time when you're using the like alpine conditions aggregated model. So there's my micro beta. I hope that's worth everybody's $5 for the month. I feel like it is. Okay. Fu asks, is training for climbing essentially a solved problem for non-professional climbers? If not, which areas do you think still have the greatest potential for impactful discoveries or improvements? I don't think training for climbing is a solved problem because I would not be in business if it was. Not because of areas lacking research or not having enough data in some place, but because improving at climbing is fundamentally more of an emotional and logistical problem for most people than something that's very mathematical. So I hear, like things like formula or flow chart sort of applied to climbing progression, like, do this and then get this and then acquire this. And that just makes so many assumptions about the journey that people are on and like how much time they have to climb and what their actual life is like and their athletic history and blah, blah, blah. Like there's no formula that solves climbing progression. I think that's a marketing gimmick fundamentally. And it just doesn't really make any sense to think about it that way. So what it makes me think of is in behavioral economics, they have this concept of econs, which is like a perfectly rational decision-making human being. So an econ would like never buy something for $7 when it could buy it for $6.95 or whatever, right? An econ would like always extract as much time value out of their money as they can. Like they would invest really early. They're not going to make emotional decisions about like buying something because it's, to buy one, get one free, but it's something they don't need. Like they wouldn't do that, They're very, very hyper rational. And if we treat climbers as econs, then sure, we know a little bit about training for climbing. It's closer to a solved problem if we treat climbers as econs, but they're not. Climbers aren't rational. Climbers make training decisions impulsively and emotionally and unpredictably, almost to a ridiculous degree. I'm reminded of some consults I've done lately with people who are, a lot of people are using AI as like a training scratch pad lately. And I think that that's maybe a good idea. It's a decent use of AI because AI can be a really good educator and it can help you organize and stuff like that. It's good at maintaining a lot of context. The one problem with AI, which I've talked about on my Instagram too, is it doesn't say no. It's so sycophantic. And so I've done these consults with people lately who are, trying to train for like a 100-mile gravel bike ride and also train to like climb a hard boulder. And also they want to climb like a free big wall next spring. And they have us all pumped into ChatGPT. And it's churning out some super convoluted, complicated, really high volume training thing for them, just being like, yeah, you got this, you're an Olympian. And I'm looking at it and just being like, dude, pick one of these things and like say no to the other things and come back to them later. And it's just an example of like, if you act like you can have it all, then AI is really going to give you that. And AI has complete and total information about all the climbing training stuff that's on the internet. It has it all. And so if it was as simple as just like taking all that stuff and doing some mathematical analysis and giving people what they need in order to progress, I think that, even the rudimentary LLMs that we have now would be better at it. But I've just seen good examples lately that they're not, because they lack like a sort of higher level thinking that humans have and coaches have, frankly. Even if climbers were econs, just to experiment, do the thought experiment of going down that kind of side, there's still a lot that we don't know. So you asked what has the greatest potential for impactful discoveries or improvements. I think the thing that bothers me the most is how little we know about how different people actually tolerate climbing and how different people actually respond to finger training in particular, or like the stress of climbing on the fingers. So I would start with like big population anthropometric surveys of the details of hand and finger physiology. I want to know what the normal ranges are for tendon length, tendon attachment points, tendon density, tendon stiffness, like untrained, I want to know about collagen types. Like, I don't think that we really know that much about the collagen that makes up connective tissue. It's something that's being studied more, but it really, really seems to impact how much training and climbing people can tolerate. I've coached people who, if you take person A and person B, they're doing like the exact same volume. They have the same time in the sport, the same training age. And one of them is just rife with pulley injuries, and the other one isn't. And so obviously those two people progress very differently. And there's so many things that we don't know about why that could be. But I think that at the bare minimum, I would like to know more about the physiology before we jump ahead to things like studying max hangs and trying to correlate them to climbing grade. I just think that's like jumping so far ahead. And there's just so much that we don't know about like how people even respond to that type of training. So that would be the starting point for me. Oh, one other starting point would be, this goes back to the Squamish conditions thing. Tribology, or like the study of surface friction. It's like a branch of physics. So people who study this work at like Tesla, or they work at like Honda, trying to make the cars more aerodynamic, for example. I would really love to know some of the details of surface friction that I think we don't know. And yeah, it's very telling how climbers have all these different habits, and climbers are almost superstitious about friction. And I feel like that means that there's a lot more to learn. Little minor story on that. This goes back to the Squamish conditions thing. Even though it's usually like 50 or 60% humidity in Squamish, I had so many sessions at the proposal this summer, a problem that I did. It's kind of like at the edge of the forest, and the wind can kind of pick up there. And, between like 5 and 7 p.m., it was so dry there, multiple different days. The wind was just whipping through. Even if it had been a wet day, the wind was going so hard and it was so dry that I found myself doing the same thing that I do in the desert, where I actually get my hands wet about 5 minutes before I'm going to go. And then I let them dry, and then I chalk up. And I think it increases the surface humidity of my skin. And it makes friction way better for me because my skin is so dry. I don't think that would work for most people, but like, learning in the last few years that it makes a big difference in the desert, and then realizing now, like, if the wind is up and it's pretty dry at a certain little microclimate, that it even works in Squamish. Kind of mind blowing to me, actually, how little I still know about friction and how to read the local conditions. So there are some things that I think are definitely not solved with climbing performance. I know that you said training for climbing, but I can't hear training for climbing and not think progression in performance in general. Good question, though. Okay, Matthew asks, one of the things I've heard you talk about at some length, often as it relates to how you're able to maximize your physical abilities, is the ability to execute. For much of my climbing, I didn't think about this as a discrete skill, but recently I've noticed that this is an ability that gets tuned up and down depending on what I've been climbing on recently, and I want to continue to develop this as a strength. So firstly, do you feel that the ability to execute is more a physical or mental skill? And do you have any advice on ways to develop this skill further, especially during an off-season with limited outdoor climbing? Okay, first off, I think the ability to execute is probably an emotional skill, so overlapping pretty significantly with the physical and the mental. But what it comes down to primarily is the ability to regulate your thinking and regulate your emotions, which I think probably people lump that into mental, but to me, emotions are also a very physical thing, and you can do physical things to manage them. So I don't think it's fair to just be like, it's brain power, mind over matter. I think it is a task that you complete. And so you do physical things to get over it. I don't think it's fair to lump it into physical or mental totally, if that makes sense. Second of all, I don't think it really matters that you have limited outdoor climbing. You would need a phase of climbing outside to get used to the skills and get used to the environment. Environment has a really big impact on your performance and your confidence. Just ask anyone who's ever done a competition. It's a lot different when people are yelling at you and there's a lot of pressure and there's a time limit and stuff. That all impacts your climbing performance really significantly. But when it comes to those key skills that you actually need to learn, you can take them a really long way, regardless of the nature of the challenge at hand. And the more you practice, the easier it's going to be. If you think about concert pianist, for example, they're going to do the vast majority of their practice probably on a piano at their house. And they're going to sometimes play at the, place that they're going to perform their recital, or I guess they wouldn't call it a recital, concert, whatever it's called. I don't know much about piano, if you couldn't tell. They'll probably play in the situation where they're going to do the show a few times, some kind of rehearsal, and then they do the show. But they've practiced it so much at home that I imagine they're just doing the same thing that they practiced, and it's not too different. So key tactics for execution, the actual stuff that you do. Number one, your visualization skills. I hammer it all the time on the podcast. It's incredibly important. You need to load a program into your body for your body to act on that program. And if you're not doing that, then you're super duper intuitive, but it also means you're going to be very reliant on your state of mind at the time and your comfort level with what you're doing and all these other things. That stuff is also super important. But when we talk about the ability to execute on command, I'm really leaning towards red pointing or doing things that you have some familiarity with, in which case discrete visualization of the sequence is a core skill. And you can practice it so relentlessly. Most people do not practice it enough. Number two, get into flow on demand. That is something you can practice all the time, every climbing session. This is your breath work before you pull on, your mantra, so things you say to yourself before you pull on, and also your visualization during the actual session. Number three, the ability to get back into flow when you've left it. That means while you're climbing, if something goes wrong or you do something not quite right or you grab a hold wrong and you have like stopping thoughts or intrusive thoughts kind of inject themselves into your execution, the ability to set that aside and stay in flow, usually with the breath or by yelling, things like that. Also a very key skill. Those would be the main things that I would try to practice. As far as homework for kind of like how to get better at the big picture of it, some things you could journal or just think about would be what situations make you feel confident, what scenarios produced the best execution mindset for you. So like what are times that you've executed really, really well? Might not necessarily be the highest challenge level that you've completed. So like the hardest grade you've climbed, just times that you feel you were climbing super well. Like when was that? Who were you with? What were the conditions like? What type of rock was it on? What was the challenge level? All that kind of stuff is going to help you understand your circle of comfort, let's say. And your job with getting better at execution is expanding the circle of comfort. So you may notice like, okay, I don't execute well when I'm with this type of partner, or I don't execute well when it's this type of rock climb. That is the area that you want to improve at. Probably the way to improve at it is to take other elements in that same situation and make them a little easier. So if you find you consistently don't execute well on steep, pumpy rock climbs and you project 13A, maybe the best way to get better at steep, pumpy rock climbs is to work on executing 12As, 12Bs, 12Cs. And if you want to be really tactical about it, you would want to make your next sport climbing trip somewhere that you could do a high volume of that climbing and expand that circle of comfort in that particular way. And this is how you become a very well-rounded climber who can execute in a lot of different situations. Really good question. Thanks, Matthew. All right, Sam asks, how do you know when retreating during a climb is an act of fear versus an act of discernment? Thanks for all you do, Jesse. Thanks for all you do, Sam. Always asking good questions. I think fear and discernment probably can coexist. It goes back to that old phrase, you can't be brave unless you're afraid. So I'm taking your question as meaning discernment is choosing not to continue because you've made a conscious risk assessment versus choosing not to continue because you're totally gripped and panicking. And I really don't know. I think it's probably pretty common to panic in the moment, and then as soon as you fall and dispel that stress, you realize it wasn't actually that bad. Maybe that's discernment. I'm not totally sure. Either way, I guess what this question makes me think is the retreat should probably be applauded as long as it is safe to retreat, as long as retreating didn't create a more dangerous situation. So, if you're on the head wall of a super high ball and like backing off would mean like reversing a mantle way off the ground or something like that, well, then that's obviously you're making it more dangerous by retreating. But if it's a situation where we're talking about like going down one move and then dropping to the pads and it's safe to do that, of all the intuitions to not second guess, I think the intuition to back off is so paramount to listen to. I mean, that's why visualization and having commitment from the ground are so important with consequential climbing. all my worst experiences with high consequence climbing happened when I committed despite having a gut feeling that I shouldn't commit. And when I say worst, I mean both like emotionally difficult, like I kept climbing, but it was really scary. And also like taking bad falls. Like all of those bad experiences happened when I was like, ooh, I'm not ready to proceed. And I was like, nah, fuck it, I can do this. I also have had some good experiences where I was like, I should not proceed. And I did proceed. One of my hardest highball first ascents, imposter syndrome. I had a horrible climbing experience doing it. It was really unpleasant. And I genuinely thought that I might fall and like seriously hurt myself. And I kept going and I made it to the top. So it's like kind of a best experience and a worst experience, if that makes sense. But I definitely don't recommend doing that. I don't think that that's how you build a good head for scary climbing. I think you want to listen to that gut feeling. And so I think discernment is always probably the wiser choice. But I definitely have a hard time teasing those two things apart because fear is ever present. It's just a question of if you're letting it kind of take the wheel and make decisions for you, you know? It's interesting to think about, though. Thanks for the question. Okay, Jack asks, hey, Jesse, much to my chagrin, it's been brought to my attention that I breathe much harder on sport routes than most other people. Maybe some component of this is due to lack of fitness, but I imagine some is also due to breathing technique or holding my breath. Do you have any tips, drills, thoughts on how to work on this and or determine if I'm just truly unfit for sport climbing? Yeah, probably I would look into your cardiovascular fitness. That's the kind of general answer. I've always thought that audible breathing while climbing, especially challenging sport climbing, is a good thing. Like if you watch the best sport climbers, you can usually at least see that they're breathing. But Adam Ondra, you know, in particular, some of his hardest red points, like I love when they do edits of him and there's no music because you can just hear him. He's like chugging like a steam locomotive, you know? And it's so obviously rhythmic with his movement. And I don't know if that's something he's consciously worked on or if it's just intuitively he's really good at it, but it's fun to watch and it's obviously empowering his climbing. So here are 3 breathing drills that I do with clients that I think are things you could incorporate. Well, number one's not really a drill. I actually just talked about this on the podcast with Andy McVitie. When you get to the gym, just sit and take 10 or 20 conscious breaths. Doesn't need to be anything special. Just don't be distracted. Don't be talking to people or anything. Just find a nice quiet place. Take some breaths when you get to the gym. Number one, it's going to help you shed your stress from the day, whatever you're doing before you were training. And number 2, it's going to help you connect to your breath and connect to your body. I mean, I think it all gets a little wooey. I don't know how much science there is, but using the breath to connect to the body is just obviously a very, very powerful tool. And in that sense, climbing is very similar to pursuits like yoga, where they know a lot more about this than we do, or they've been doing it for a lot longer than climbing has. And it does clearly seem to work in those cases. So just taking a moment at the beginning of the session to connect with that. Number 2, conscious breathing. So take a bunch of conscious breaths before you pull on. I would say 5 would be a good number. In that case, it's okay if you're doing something else. You could be talking to someone, you could be chalking up your hands, but deep breaths, you know, several seconds in, several seconds out, and then go pull onto your route and just see how that impacts your climbing. You might want to breathe longer if you're doing a sport climb or a long boulder. I think about 5 breaths is good for a boulder problem. Ethan Pringle, friend of the show, has said he feels like if he breathes for 3 minutes before he gets on, he gets 3 minutes of benefit. If he breathes for 20 minutes before he pulls on, he gets 20 minutes of benefit. So the longer the thing he's trying to do, the longer he's going to sit and do his breath practice. Which goes back to Olga's question from the beginning of the show. Imagine, you know, you're out there climbing with your buddy and he's like, all right, I'm all tied in and ready to go. I'm going to sit here and breathe for 20 minutes. You know, if he's got partners that good, they must be out there somewhere. Third drill is rhythmic breathing. It's just something to experiment with. This is also in, there are variations of this in John Kettle's technique book. But that would be timing your breath with each hand or foot move. So the first thing to practice with is only breathing in during moves or only breathing out during moves and just see what that feels like. And then the second thing to practice with, which is going to be a lot more relevant for hard climbing, is practice holding your breath while you're actually moving your hand or foot and then breathing in when you're in positions. It's going to feel weird at first. You know, paying attention to the breath is very powerful, but it's also something that is just regulating itself the rest of the time. And so when you start actually paying attention to it while you're trying to do something else, it has a little bit of a trying to chew bubblegum and walk at the same time sort of feeling. Like, it's not hard, but if you start thinking about it, it gets complicated. And now I'm sitting here running out of breath while I'm talking because I'm thinking about my breathing while I'm recording a podcast. Just the Occam's razor answer here is make sure that you're hitting your recommended guidelines for cardiovascular fitness. So a couple hours a week of moderate intensity or a slightly shorter amount of vigorous intensity. You could do anaerobic capacity testing of the fingers, or critical force test if you're curious about those things. They might reveal something, but if it feels like it's more about your breathing, then it's probably general cardiovascular more than your fingers. Good question. All right, we're rolling straight on through. Jantina asks, I know climbers who are frustrated by a plateau in their performance, but are reluctant, skeptical, and even disdainful about the prospect of working with a coach. Their main objections include, quote, I've seen sample training plans from coaches and there's no way I have the time, energy, or capacity to complete that much training. Quote, all the information about training for climbing is available for free online and on podcasts, so why would I pay for coaching? Quote, my friends climbed my goal grade without coaching, so why would I need help when they didn't? And quote, I mainly need to improve my technique and mindset, and a coach can't help with that unless they're physically present at the crag watching me climb. In your recent Instagram reel, you said, climbing coaching does not produce level ups. Intention and consistency produce level ups. What you want from a coach is for them to empower you and remind you of your own agency. From that lens, how would you respond to the objections above? Any other advice for climbers about how to find a good climbing coach and maximize the value of working with them? Such a dense and well thought out question. To just answer the last part first, I'm having Carly Rager back on the show. Carly Rager. Dang it. I'm sorry, Carly. I'm having her back on the show. I'll have her clarify how to pronounce her name. I don't know why this is such a theme of my podcast that I can't pronounce people's names. I swear I'm good at pronouncing names in real life. Anyways, Carly has recently written some stuff about how to pick a coach, which I thought was really well done. So it's something we wanted to talk about the first time she came on the show. I think she's going to be a pseudo regular guest, or I hope. So definitely we'll try to talk about that, how to pick a coach and how to maximize working with the coach. As far as the objections above, these are all things that I've heard from people who have paid for coaching from me. So I'll just kind of take these one at a time because I think they're all fair objections. Just off the top, like there are totally cases where this is going to be true. So let's take them one at a time. I've seen sample training plans from coaches and there's no way I have the time, energy, or work capacity to complete that much training. So first of all, I'm not a huge believer in pre-made plans, and I've also been told many, many times that my plans are a lower volume than other coaches. Part of that is just because I don't believe in survivorship bias as a training strategy. And going back to some of the questions we've had today, higher levels of intention are very, very helpful for progressing at climbing. You don't actually need that much volume if you're being very deliberate with the volume you do. And also, bouldering especially is very powerful. So lower volumes tend to be more effective for making sure that every single session is as powerful as we can make it. So my plans tend to be pretty low volume. I have also seen many plans that I definitely would not be able to do. And I have also worked with coaches, climbing coaches, where I either wasn't able to complete the program or I had to complain to the coach and have them reduce the volume of the program because I knew that it was going to break me. So it's very relatable, honestly. And I do frankly think that a lot of training plans out there are just really high volume. So fair complaint. Not necessarily an argument about working with any coach, but it is definitely a problem with a lot of coaching and training out there. Next one. All the information about training for climbing is available for free online and on podcasts, so why would I pay for coaching? Kind of touched on this in a previous question. Just the fact that the information is out there doesn't mean that you're applying it correctly to your climbing. So part of the job of a coach is to take that fire hose and reduce it down to a drinking fountain that you can sip from. And also, as I said earlier, a coach is someone who's going to tell you no sometimes, and a coach is someone who's going to push you in the right times. And the ability to discern which one to do is very important and something that's really hard to do when you're inside your own head. So a lot of people pay for coaching to outsource that decision making. Quote, my friends climbed my goal grade without coaching, so why would I need help when they didn't? Yeah, I haven't actually really heard this one myself, but comparison is the thief of joy for sure. So if someone climbs a given grade without coaching and you don't, I don't know what to say about that other than some people go to the NBA, some people can dunk, some people can run a 4-minute mile, and some people do those things with or without the help of coaches, just based on who they are and what they can do and how they think. So yeah, everybody's different. I don't think this is a serious objection, so I don't have much else to say to it. Everybody's different. Being coached, I'll say this actually. People who are open-minded are the most coachable. So if you're automatically coming into it assuming that you don't need help, you're going to have a hard time getting very much out of it. Okay, next one. I mainly need to improve my technique and mindset, and a coach can't help with that unless they're physically present at the crag watching me climb. I have helped a lot of climbers with their technique and mindset remotely, so I'm very confident that this works. I think the higher level somebody gets, the more nuanced the issue is, especially with their technique. It does get harder, mostly because the pace of feedback and them trying something is so slow relative to what it could be. And remote is always going to pale in comparison of working in person when it comes to movement especially. But I actually think remote has a lot of benefits when it comes to mindset, because when you're actually at the thing and when you're reflecting on the thing later are two very different states of mind. And a good coach is always getting you during the reflection phase, and then they can give you some things to work on in the next session. And so that's a place where the slower feedback loop actually is beneficial of remote. Versus with the movement piece, I would always push somebody to go work with a coach in person rather than remotely if they have the option to do that. But remotely can still be really good for a lot of things related to technique, as long as the person is good and very diligent about their video and about feedback, like interacting with the coach. And also the person needs to be very intentional. So if they're going to send the video to the coach and then the coach tells them something and then they go off to their session and they just kind of do whatever and half-ass it and they don't really apply what they were told to apply, again, it's not really going to be effective. But that's not an argument against coaching. That's an argument against being unintentional with your climbing. So I hope that's all sort of useful. Just to be clear, I don't think that coaching is for everybody, and I don't think that my coaching is for everybody. There are better coaches for different people than me, for sure. And anytime somebody works with me and then winds up working with a different coach later, it just makes me feel good, you know, especially if they work with that other coach for a long time. I'm like, sweet, they found the person who works for them and supports them and has them on the path, you know, or maybe they don't work with a coach at all, in which case I'm like, they're on the path themselves, you know. I just feel purely good about that. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thanks for the questions, as always, Jantina. Okay, Anthony asks, people have told me I can either train power endurance or train strength enough so moves become easier. As a boulderer, strength training feels more applicable and more fun. So when and how do you recommend I train power endurance? Okay, this is an adaptation timeline question, which I've talked about on the AMAs before. So you might want to go back and look. By the way, if anyone doesn't know, I have a spreadsheet of all the questions that I try to keep updated. So if you're on my Patreon, you can go find that list of all the questions and just search through it. It's going to give you timestamps for every single question that's ever been asked on here. So if there's a question similar to yours, you'll be able to learn a lot from that. Strength makes everything easier. You need to endure less stuff if you are stronger. Or in the words of, I want to say, Tony Yaniro, if you can't do the move, there is nothing to endure. You have to be strong enough to do the moves at a certain point. But I am very strength-pilled, having been a boulderer for a long time. And to be honest, I've been doing a lot more capacity training in the last few years because I noticed in summer 2025 that it was very hard to get back to sport climbing. My aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity were just really bad. My peak force is really high, and my critical force was like kind of okay, but the drop off of the curve was really steep. I just could not maintain for very long. So it kind of goes back to that, like I'm firing everything, you know, like I'm climbing 511, but I'm giving it V11 effort, and it's just hard to down regulate that. So I do think training capacity more often has a little bit of value, not just physiologically, but like technically and just remembering to make things as easy as you can, even when you have an abundance of strength to do it. I think there's some merit there, but that's not really power endurance. And this is something that people commonly get wrong. Like there are gradations to endurance. Power endurance is the most extreme energy system, the phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate system, which is about 30 to 40 seconds of effort. It's like a sprint. That's power endurance. As far as adaptation timelines, that adapts within a couple weeks. So a couple sessions a week, 2-3 weeks, you're going to get more power endurance. The more efficient and slower energy systems, which we would usually call strength endurance or endurance, those take a little longer to adapt, but they also stick around a little longer. Strength takes the longest to adapt, but it sticks around for a very long time. So training strength all the time is kind of just a natural gambit because strength adaptations are going to stick around even when you have different types of projects, or you take breaks, or you get injured, or conditions are bad, whatever it is. Whereas just doing a spike of power endurance, if you then go try a powerful problem that doesn't have a lot of endurance on it, or you get sick, or you go to Hawaii for 2 weeks, all those things are going to detrain your power endurance just a little bit. And so that adaptation timeline just tells us if you chase endurance all the time, it's not very efficient, right? You're going to gain some, but some of the gains are also going to dissipate relatively faster than strength gains would. So for a boulderer, just chasing power endurance all the time is kind of like a questionable strategy. Here are 2 tips though, because it is really important. And if you're struggling with falling off the end of things, or you're finding the moves really hard in the middle of your project, even though you can do them in isolation, then you probably are lacking in the strength endurance and power endurance department. So here are 2 tips. Number 1, don't strictly periodize your training. Keep your training nonlinear, so train a little bit of everything all the time, but maybe do a little booster shot of power endurance right before a trip or a season. So 2 to 4 weeks of 1 to 2 sessions a week of something like endurance triples or 4x4s or 15 to 20 move circuits right before the trip or right before the season, and then a little, taper or deload. And then you'll come into the season with a little more power endurance, and hopefully you hang on to it just by doing project level climbing like red point attempts. Second tip, for long seasons, make your first project of the season something much more endurance-y at a slightly easier grade than your limit. So coming into the season, I'll often have a V12 or 13 project. I'll often find a V10 or V11 that's like 12 to 15 moves that I can work on. And I'll often work on it in a very casual kind of way, like not try to do it in a session. I'll try to take my time and do a really good job on it. So I get lots of laps doing it. And that way I'm getting out, I'm conditioning my skin, I'm getting used to climbing on rock again. And I'm also getting that sort of booster shot thing, but I'm doing it like by climbing, outside instead of in the gym. All right, moving right along. Rob asks, "Hi Jesse, I'd be interested to know if you cycle your training, for instance, doing blocks of training with a specific focus like strength, endurance, etc. And if not, what your typical training week looks like." So on periodization, which is what you are referring to when you say cycling your training, I used to do it a lot more back when the Rock Climbers Training Manual came out. Maybe 3 or 4 years before that book came out, there was this kind of holy grail on the internet called the Rock Prodigy Training Guide, which is basically how to apply classical linear periodization to rock climbing. And everybody who was a climber and a training geek at that time did cycles of this linear periodization, thinking it was just like the best thing ever, and it was going to catapult their climbing to new heights. Turned out to not really be the best for most people. For most climbers, I think some form of nonlinear periodization is probably a better way to go, which basically means you train a little bit of everything all the time. But to be honest with you, Rob, I just think most climbers don't need to think quite so extremely about all those things as being very different, especially if you take a nonlinear sort of approach. And it's just much, much simpler for boulderers. Like, we still need energy systems in bouldering. We still even need to develop the aerobic energy system in bouldering, but it's a lot more low key than it is for sport climbers. I think periodization is a much more potent tool for sport climbers, where there's more different adaptation timelines that need to be managed in order to produce peaks where you can really climb at your limit. Whereas in bouldering, it's so much about the tactics and the movement and the power that just strength and power all the time and a little bit of endurance when you need it seems to be a pretty effective strategy. So I'll kind of use my last year or so of the calendar to kind of run you through how I think about things as I go. I have a little bit of a skinny chef kind of thing, right? There's this like sort of, it's not a saying, but this idea that, people work in really high end restaurants and they're fancy chefs making really, delicious and perfect looking food. And then they come home and eat like peanut butter jelly sandwiches, or don't eat at all. I'm much more that way. I think I make pretty good training plans and I'm a pretty good coach for certain people. But as far as my own training, I'm much more thinking about like how to put myself in the right situation to have opportunities to send things. And most of my actual training is just the baseline so that I'm ready for those opportunities when they arise. Just because I've kind of learned over time, like, okay, I get my training perfectly right down to the, 0.01% detail, but then, I wasn't paying attention to some other factor and I got busy at work or I messed up something on my schedule and I, missed the window for the conditions. And I've been burned by that so many times that I realized like, okay, actually paying more attention to my life and just keeping my training quite basic seems to be more effective for putting me in a situation where I can capitalize on opportunities. Part of the reason that I can get away with that is because I've been climbing for a really long time. And so I have a high degree of like movement skill and tactical knowledge that I can draw from to capitalize on those opportunities when they arise. And not everybody has those things. So then the physical stuff becomes more important for those people because they're going to make more errors and they need a little more capacity to like learn the moves than I do for operating at anything below like my limit. When I'm actually at my limit, a lot of that stuff goes out the window. I'm just like everybody else, really. So anyways, so about a year ago, summer 25, I was mostly sport climbing. I've been on a bit of a kick to try to build my capacity, and I knew with a baby coming that it was going to be harder for me to maintain a high level of capacity. I also really like sport climbing. So last summer, all I did was a lot of basic lifting and cardio, heavy compound lifts, cardio several times a week, big approaches to sport climbing crags at the top of hills, and a lot of like moderately hard sport climbing, projecting and like red pointing. Not really a lot of like flashing and on-sighting just because there isn't a ton of like volume around here for me to do that on. Also built a home wall in summer. So like those were the things that I was kind of focused on. I knew I had the baby coming. So I was sort of trying to prepare for that. That's what I was thinking about rather than like strength or power. In fall, when the baby came, I backburned everything but just bouldering outside. And really the last month or so leading up to the baby, I was just bouldering outside. I did almost no training unless the weather forced me to. And then I would climb on my wall and keep adding holds to it so that I'd be ready and have a lot of problems to use when the baby was there so that I wouldn't need to be like drilling holds into the wall and coming up with problems. So I think by the time the baby got here, I had a couple hundred problems set on the board. After she was born, I did a 12-week block of lifting with Natasha Barnes, mostly to keep myself accountable to lift twice a week because I knew I wasn't going to want to do that while being really tired. And that worked pretty well. So I stayed pretty strong. I didn't really set any PBs during that block of training, but I made some improvements on my form, especially with my deadlift. And I learned a lot working with Natasha. She's pretty sharp. And then when the weather allowed, I kind of switched between projecting and capacity days. When the weather got bad in fall, I switched between projecting and capacity days on the board, but it was really inconsistent. I would say I was getting outside maybe once a week on the east side of the mountains here, as long as the weather let me do that. And then maybe climbing on the board one other time or sometimes twice. The baby was pretty easy for the first few months, so I could get away with a decent amount of volume. So that was really my training. It was like 2 days of lifting a week, 1 day outside, and then 1 or 2 days on the board. And if I projected outside, I'd probably do capacity on the board. If I had 2 days on the board, I'd probably also do some projecting on the board on that other day. And then come spring, we went to Chattanooga. I was planning on sport climbing again this summer. So I switched back to doing some capacity building on the board with my volume day. And then with the outdoor climbing, I basically stuck to one project the whole spring here locally. So I would say my week during that time was like getting on that project or a project once a week, maybe getting outside one other day, like in the evening during the week. So I would usually leave my house at like dinner time, basically, and my wife would handle bedtime. And then I could stay out as late as I wanted, as long as I gave up sleep, because I had to get up when the baby got up. So I could usually get away with that. I would usually climb about twice a week during that time. Maybe I was lifting once a week at that point for most of spring, and I wound up really glad that I did that 12-week block in winter because I had a nice base to kind of keep things moving along. And then we wound up finding a spot to rent in Squamish. So even though I'd been planning to sport climb and building some endurance, I went bouldering instead. So it's a perfect example of like, you make plans and God laughs, basically. Like you can't, or at least for me, my life is maybe a little too chaotic to like plan perfectly with my training, but it actually worked out really well. Usually when I'm in more capacity phases and not trying as hard, my body tends to feel a little better. So I went into Squamish feeling healthy, even if my training had been pretty haphazard and not really very targeted for bouldering. And I think during the whole month that we were there, I only did 2 lifting days. I think I lifted twice. Otherwise, I just alternated between limit projecting and like flash to session project level climbing. So like one day I would go try like a V12 or 13. And then the other day I would go try maybe like V8 to 10 or something like that, and just resting as much as needed between those days. And I did also go out with my wife and the baby quite a lot, where she would be climbing on easier boulders because she's recovering from the birth and stuff, and I would climb on those with her pretty often. But that's mostly just tooling around, and I don't really know if I count that as climbing days. But that was my summer, so now I'm back home, and the next question is going to ask about that, so I'll kind of hold off on answering that part. But you can probably tell as an athlete that basic strength is my primary limiting factor. So this sounds crazy for a climbing coach to say, but I don't put that much thought into my climbing sessions. It's very skinny chef. It's a lot of projecting capacity days because I am already very intentional. So I'm much more limited by time and capacity and recovery. So the focus of my training is keeping my body strong so that I can climb and practice a lot. And I think being almost 40, that's probably pretty common for people in my demographic. All right, that leads me into the next question, which I think is the last question. We're in the Jesse's climbing phase of the AMA. Daniel asks, what's your plan for the rest of the year? Good question. So my 40th birthday is in about 2 months. So I just started a new program. Basically, it sounds kind of funny, but basically I just feel like being super jacked on my 40th birthday, or at least doing my best to run a hypertrophy cycle up to my birthday to see if I can look a little more swole. I told myself I would be the most jacked when I turned 40 that I've been in my life, which I already am. But it won't hurt to be a little bit more ballooned up than I am now. But also hypertrophy can be very time efficient if it's done the right way. So I'm running a hypertrophy cluster program, which basically means the weights are pretty low, but the rest time is also low, and you do a lot of volume. So it's like an 8x4 or a 6x6 at like 70% of your max, but with only 45 to 90 seconds of rest, depending on how heavy the lift is, depending on like how compound the lift is. So that's been, fun to program. We'll see how it actually is in actuality, because I'm not very far into it yet. So in a couple of weeks, I might be really hating it, but I think it's going to be pretty fun. And I was just talking about this with a friend the other day, because I've been on this kind of kick on Instagram of talking about weight and climbing. But like I used to be low 140s. I'm 5'10 plus 4. And I used to be like 143, 144 pounds for a long, long time. And I'm closer to 160 nowadays. And my climbing and my body, feels, other than the fact that I've aged and I've taken a lot of big falls and stuff like that, like as far as how it feels to climb, it just feels vastly better than it ever did when I was 143. Like I'm so much stronger. I can control things. I can lock off. I can pull with my legs so much harder than I used to. And I just imagine that another 5 or 10 pounds is just going to give me more of the same. There has to be a ceiling to that. Like I'm guessing that going from 200 to 220 would not be as good as going from 140 to 160, but I'm interested to see. So I'm curious to kind of run this experiment and try to get a little bigger. And I'm not really too worried about feeling bad on small holds. I've gotten much, much stronger on small holds while I gained 15 pounds. So, the timeline there is like 5 years or something for me to gain that weight. So I've had lots of time to adapt to it. But yeah, I'm sure there is a point where that becomes less true. Anyways, this has been a side rant. So yeah, I thought I would be sport climbing right now. Another monkey wrench is Bear Grass just opened, which is my new local climbing gym. Incredibly beautiful facility. I've only been there once, but I want to go back every other day like I did when I was an early climber. It's just so beautiful. The setting is very high quality. They clearly put a huge amount of time and thought into all the details. And I want to go. I'm kind of drooling just thinking about it, actually. So that's going to probably play some havoc with my training a little bit, because it's just so easy to get distracted and, try really hard in those situations. Also, they have some boards. They have 2 kilter boards and a tension board, which there's really nothing like that publicly available where I live. Just spray walls. And I have my board in my garage, but commercial boards are so fun to climb on and so good socially that I think that'll be like a really interesting tool. So some of those things I'm just going to use very freely and haphazardly to sort of have fun climbing. I don't think that I'm going to like do anything really structured on those, because I've never really climbed on them. So I just want to gain some familiarity with them at first. But I'll probably do more climbing on the commercial sets at that gym, and do more of my board climbing at home, because that would be like we don't have time to drive to the gym, or the baby's down and I have 1 hour because I want to go to bed. So I'll just like squeeze in a board session. I'll probably do a lot more of that kind of stuff. But I doubt I'll be able to resist climbing on the TV2 a little bit here and there. It's just too fun. As far as my plans for the rest of the year, I don't know what my time availability is going to look like because of childcare, which is a new sort of thing, like obstacle to my climbing performance, to be blunt. I would really like to try sling blade sit again. I think I'm much stronger in the ways that really matter for that problem, but it's very time consuming and exhausting to project. So if I'm tight on time, I might not commit to that. I think I'm going to keep doing some circuits and endurance training here and there, just in case, because it doesn't cost me too much to try to maintain some of what I've developed there. I feel that I need to come into that project with a higher base than I did in 2024 to like speed up the process of familiarizing myself with it, which I already have, I think, my beta. So that'll be a little faster, but yeah, it's sort of a TBD for me. Like I hold those things very loosely these days, just because the chance that like something will go a little bit differently than anticipated is so high. And also because that type of problem, like I feel confident that I have, 10, 12, maybe more years to still climb at that level. And so I'm just not too worried about whether I do it right now or not. And like, if the opportunity presents itself, you best believe I'm going to like lock in and set some things aside and reprioritize and try to do it. But I'm not going into fall like super dead set on any specific thing. I would also like to put a couple sessions into Penrose. I said I was going to do that this spring and it did not materialize. So yeah, I'd like to try it this fall for sure. Past that, when the weather's done for Levy, I found a couple lines that I think I'm excited to bolt on the east side. So that should be fun. I haven't bolted anything in quite a few years. Also haven't climbed Advantage much, so I'm wondering if I can do a bit of a sport climbing phase in the winter. There's a south-facing wall there that I think has quite a few 512s on it. And then in the training world, I know I took a lot of notes for this question, so I hope people find this interesting. I'm still working on my hanging. My right shoulder injury is a problem, which I got in 2024 trying sling blade. It's improved quite a bit, but I still have a hard time dead hanging on that arm, even just from a bar, which may surprise some people because I'm still climbing like V12 pretty regularly. But it's getting better, and I can just about hang like with my scapula totally elevated again, which is nice. I don't have to be like super locked to feel safe. And maybe I won't ever be able to like swing around on it quite the same, because I definitely did injure it in some capacity, but it feels good that it's getting better. So after I rebuild that kind of one arm hang, I'd like to work on one arm hanging on like some larger edges just for the shoulder coordination. Finger strength wise, I think I just climbing on my board and the TB2 at Beargrass is probably all I really need. The other thing I'm psyched on in my training, I haven't really talked about this anywhere, but I feel like maybe 70% certain that we're going to try to go to Rocklands next year. So that's part of why I'm psyched on the hypertrophy, especially the lower body training, because I'm still very powerful. I can still, like, my vert is still pretty good. I can still jump pretty good, but I've lost a lot of my confidence. And I used to be very good at dynoing, like 10, 12 years ago. I used to love that style of climbing. I'm kind of the natural power phenotype, but I've never climbed a V11 or V12 dyno. That's a type of problem that I haven't done. And so it's really just, that's a fascinating like training arc that I could pursue, would be try to come back when I'm 40. Last time I went to Rocklands, I was 32 and I thought I was old. It'd be interesting to come back at 40 and try to do like a V12 dyno. I think that'd be pretty sick. So that would be a lot of lower body training and a lot of plyo and getting my shoulders a lot stronger than they have been for the last couple of years. So I think that's kind of an exciting like thing that I could undertake, and it feels pretty reasonable because I have some like not noob gains, but I just haven't worked on that, a lot of that stuff in quite a while. But I do think I'm naturally good at it. So it could be fun, and it'd be a fun opportunity to talk to a lot of other coaches and trainers and good dynoers on my podcast, have some of those people on the podcast and like talk to them about training and logistics for that stuff. I think that could be really cool. All right. That's probably enough rambling about my own climbing for now. I appreciate the question though. Always a nice opportunity to talk about myself. So thank you. Thanks to everyone for all the good questions. This month, I think this might wind up being the longest AMA episode. I feel like we must be past an hour or pushing an hour. So thanks so much for all the questions. Thanks for all the support, on Patreon. And if you guys want to ask questions, those listeners who are not subscribers, you can become a subscriber and you can ask questions. And I would very much appreciate your support, just like I appreciate all the support of everybody who does support me. So, all right, that's all for now. Thanks, guys. I will see you in the August 2026 AMA in a month. Bye-bye.